What does it look like to be deeply rooted in Christ in a world of cultural chaos? Welcome to the Equip Podcast. I'm Mark Vance, the lead pastor at Cornerstone Church of Ames, and each week we want to look at core biblical truths that will equip you to live a life of faithfulness, to be salt and light wherever Jesus has called you.
Welcome back to the Equip Podcast. Emily Jensen here with Mark Vance and our tree picture, which is back on the wall. If you guys
is on the wall.
Caught the last episode.
I think it's hung there very solidly too as well.
It's not coming down again.
It is not coming down.
Act of God if it does.
Unless we have something terrible go wrong in our filming studio here at Cornerstone, this picture will be remaining throughout the entirety of the podcast.
Yes. Okay, so today we are talking about the Sixth Commandment, which is really all about the sanctity of life. Do not murder. Right. Simeon preached on that on Sunday and did an incredible overview of what that means. But we kind of want to talk a little bit about some cultural trends that are happening that might be coming for our country. Why don't you tell us a little bit about that article that you sent me from Trevin Wax and what that was about? Yeah,
I shared this over to you, Emily, probably a couple weeks ago here, but the spreading darkness of assisted suicide. This is an article by Trevin Wax. Trevin's been out here, done some stuff with us at Cornerstone. We love the work that Trevin puts in, but he is documenting an experiment with basically legalization of assisted suicide in some sort of form, where, particularly in Canada's parliament, it's been a decade that passed since Canada legalized euthanasia. And I'm just going to read a couple things on this, which is going to be a little mind-boggling and kind of gut-churning if you're a Christian. Today, 1 in 20 Canadians who die are euthanized. Okay, 1 in 20 Canadians who die have their own life taken. Okay, that's a shocker. Okay, an in-depth report. This is, if you want to see the reporting on this, this is Elena Plot Calabro in The Atlantic. Canada is killing itself. That was the title of the article in The Atlantic, which painstakingly, with incredible fairness, paints a picture of a culture that it now exists, a whole medical infrastructure, financial infrastructure surrounding assisted suicide, gleaning perspectives from participants, providers, quote unquote, and opponents. Providers being people who actually kill people for a living. That's what they do. Okay. She traces the rapid expansion of euthanasia, at first limited to the sickest patients who were already at the end of life, but now broadened to anyone with a serious diagnosed medical condition, with proposals at current in Canada to make the practice available potentially to those with mental illness and even potentially to a minor. Okay, what's happened? So that's the article, and what Trevin lays out is what happens is when patient autonomy, I get the right to make my own choices as an individual, not a moral architecture of God who is sovereign and who authors both life and allows for death, that he's the one who orders our days. When I order my own fate, I order my own days, begins to get in the forefront, then words like equality, access, and compassion begin to attach to a concept like the right to choose to die. And once that is in motion, the question is, where does that stop? And so the article, again, I don't know that it's one you want to read. It's probably one as a Christian you should, is The Spreading Darkness of Assisted Suicide by Trevin Wax. And it really brings up a whole load of questions for the Christian. But I think at the core of it, the question is, how much do we value life and how much do we value God's orders of his command? Do not take human life, because human life made in the image of the Creator is valuable. Whether the person feels they're valuable, that's not of consequence. The person is valuable in their essence. Whether they're contributing something flourishing to society, that's not a question for a Christian. You're valuable not because of what you produce. You're not a commodity. You're an image bearer. You're not valuable because of the things you contribute to the lives of others. You're valuable because you're valuable. Value is the essence of a person. And therefore, life is not something we have the right to take. That is the Creator's decision. And so, it's a chilling article. It's worth a read. It's a disturbing read.
Yeah, there was a couple of phrases that stuck out to me in that, and I think one you mentioned was this phrase, radical autonomy.
Yes.
One of the quotes from it says, radical autonomy, to die with dignity means to die on your own terms, to decide when your life should end, redefining dignity as ultimate human control. And once that becomes the sacred belief that cannot be questioned, any obstacle to fulfilling someone's desire for death becomes inherently unjust. And so the word
Wow.
was like sacrosanct, which that's not a
Yeah.
word we use very often, so I looked it up. And it's something that is considered like most sacred, most holy, like you can forsake everything else, but you can't forsake this. And I just think that idea of autonomy and ultimate control over life seems to be connected in not just euthanasia, but in situations where abortion is coming about. Like,
For sure.
I guess I just think that argument or that sense that I am the ultimate determiner of the value of a life
Right.
seems to be tied to all kinds of situations
Absolutely
where death
right.
is happening. What do you think is like the theological underpinning there?
Yeah, the thread we can pull out just simply looking at how our culture talks about the issues. I have someone who is pro-life, or what's the alternative? I'm pro-choice. Choice.
Like pro-death.
Yeah, I want to say the alternative should
Yeah.
be pro-life versus pro-death, but what we're saying is pro-choice. What they mean,
Yeah.
understood at the deepest, is the sacrosanct thing in a culture is the right and freedom of the individual.
Right. It's not life, it's the individual.
The individual and their choices. And that goes back, Emily, all the way to the foundation of the Ten Commandments series. I'm attempting to offer a alternative moral vision to secular modernity, which says that freedom is found in the right to do whatever I want to do, so long as it doesn't hurt somebody else. So once that's your definition of freedom, then actually the idea that I can choose to end my life so long as I'm not ending anybody else's in the process becomes something within my grasp to take. Because pro-choice, my individual autonomy to do whatever I feel like doing, is actually the center of the moral universe. When we take God out, and I'm going to make the argument theistically, okay? I'm not trying to make a broad argument just simply on the basis of, natural law here. I'm saying when God is removed from the picture, the question is who has the authority to decide what for who? And once God's out, it's either the government or the individual that makes the choice. And in this case, they're saying, well, I think the individual needs to have the sacrosanct right to do whatever they would want with the end of life. And I just think, first off, that there's a theological problem, because what we're saying is, no, when we say do not murder, we're saying that God made that law and that God has the right to determine life and death. But I also want to press back and say, underneath this, there's other things at work here. For instance, in a Christian world, we value the way that our life impacts others. So when I say it's my life, I can take it, I feel emotional about that, because I have many friends who have had parents take their life. And you look at that and I go, you believed somehow at the end of your life that you being removed from the picture was a grace to the people around you. And what you ended with was an act that was fundamentally, when we make pro-choice the center of the universe, what we say is selfishness is the center of the universe. Selfish choices can be the best choices. And as a Christian, we say no, always no. Love is the choice we make. And so it's not just that we dishonor God, we also dishonor the value we have to others. We are moving away from selfless love to selfish choice. And so anytime we move in that direction as a culture, where that takes us, it is a place like this, where we can use phrases like the right to die is in the article. This is a quote from one of the authors of the Canadian movement. The right to die is sacrosanct. It's a sacred right to die. Man, we're headed to somewhere really dark.
Yeah.
At a deep level.
Yeah, one of the other words that stood out to me was the word burdensome.
Oh, yeah. Yeah.
So this is, again, a quote from the article. This whole euthanasia thing is like, it's society's way of conferring honor on the person who opts for suicide. And it changes the social dynamic around death so that pressure builds toward the simpler and less burdensome choice.
Right.
Okay.
Right.
And what I want to pull out there is this idea that it's like society saying, if someone no longer produces or has visible value,
Right. Right.
they're not adding to the world, whatever that means, they have become burdensome.
Correct.
Therefore, burdensome people don't have a right to life, or like they don't need to live. You can go ahead and take your life. You're burdensome, right? To your family, whatever. And I just think that line of thinking, we can see it in this extreme situation. I think, though, as everyday Christians, as a part of the church, we sometimes get frustrated with burdensome people.
Yeah.
And
absolutely.
those are thoughts that go through our head. So I feel like there's a real challenge here as well for someone who's like, I do care about the sanctity of life. I do think that every life has value. Well, what do you call someone who's not adding value to your life, who needs a lot of care? Are you thinking of them as a big old burden?
Yeah. Yeah. Jesus, the disciples have a way that they're trying to help Jesus out in the Gospels, moderating the people who come to him. And you can imagine them thinking, Jesus, you've become a pretty big deal. You need to use your time well. You need to make sure you're influencing the most influential. And so they have a whole pack of kids who want to come to Jesus. And they think, don't let kids get near to him. He has more important people to talk to. And Jesus says, yeah, but actually all of you to get into the kingdom would have to become like these. You'd have to have faith like a child. Let the little children come unto me. I had a pastor friend, Emily, who we were talking about ways to preserve your heart in ministry, particularly in seasons when ministry is outwardly fruitful. And he said he began to notice over the years of doing ministry that he only spent his time with people who he thought were worth his time. And so he's like, as I looked over my schedule for months, I could see a pattern that I had spent my time on the influential, but no time for the broken, no time for the needy, no time for the single mom. And he said, I've just begun to make it a point that I intentionally have at least one person who nothing about that meeting benefits me. It's just an act of love. And that has really impacted me. Even when I think about who I interact with in the foyer at church, I'm not trying to think, how do I get to the high and mighty? I'm trying to think what Jesus would say, let the little children come unto me. Is there a kid I can talk to by name? Is there somebody who they might not have been seen by somebody else, but I could see them? And if we can have a culture where we see the people that society overlooks, we're probably moving closer to the heart of Jesus. But that would mean we're seeing people who are burdensome, who don't have a contribution to make because they add some social capital to me because of the interaction. And so I think we have to move there. The other side to the burdensome thing, though, is I think there's a piece that I've watched as our saints get older in our church who are getting closer to death. And there's a sort of selfless thing where they say, I've always been the provider for my family, and now I'm bedridden. I don't have much of anything I feel left to offer, and I'm longing for home. Yeah. And so I want to say to people, every distorted, horrible idea comes out of a place that it makes sense, but we're offering a nonsense answer. So what do we do with people who are dying with terminal illness? Yeah. Right? What do we do with, Emily, with a medical system that can almost indefinitely prolong your dying? So I want to suggest that while I think the euthanasia, like literally assisting the suicide of people, that's murder. Literally, that's murder. We need to say that that's true. At the same side, we can also say as Christians, there might be certain sorts of medical interventions that as we age, we thoughtfully look and say, this isn't actually fighting off the sin curse or bringing relief of pain in a useful way. This is actually just simply serving to avoid the act of dying, which is happening. Where we're going to probably, in our 80s and 90s, not do radical heart procedures that actually a lot of people in society would do. Because we're going to actually go, no, because Christ is my hope in life and death, and my life is not my own. I can actually look at that and say, Jesus has given me a beautiful, full life, and I don't need to take radical measures to preserve life because I'm so afraid of death. I think that's one thing we could say. Here's another thing I think we have to say, is that we talk at Cornerstone about having different areas where from birth to death, we believe that people made in the image of God matter. And one of the partnership areas for us is bringing dignity to dying. And so it's caring for families through Grief Share. It's putting in a cemetery, a graveyard connected to our church. We're working on that so that we're reminded of the witness of the living and the dead. But also it's partnering with organizations like hospice. Hospice is designed to help bring care and alleviation of pain and discomfort to those who are terminally ill and dying. And I've been with people inside the hospice center. I've had that impact on my family as well in my grandpa's death. And it's some of the most beautiful, loving, caring, gentle people who come at a moment where you can't anticipate and you're overwhelmed by what's happening, and they help hold your hand through one of the hardest paths you're going to walk. That's a way to give beauty and dignity to people who are made in God's image. But here's what a hospice nurse won't do. They won't overdose you to take your life.
Right.
They're there to walk with you, but they won't take what is not theirs to take. That's God's alone. And so I do think that there are ways, I'll give the quote from Trevin, the church's role in this culture of death will be to disciple believers to suffer faithfully, to prepare them with theological and spiritual resources for hardship and death. That's what we have to give people, is the truth of Jesus that they can cling to. And we have to give people dignity, Emily. All the way through, you are not valuable. We live in a culture that thinks people who are young, hot, and beautiful are valuable. And I want to say people who are wrinkly, whose bodies are failing, and who pray for our church are incredibly valuable. People who have very little to give that they can see, might just be like the widow who shows up and gives the mite, who gives the little gift that everybody else misses but Jesus sees. And so what if we promoted that as a culture of life all the way through? So I think for me, just reading Trevin's article, it kind of prompted a reflection of what it means to be really fully pro-life. It's not just like an issue that I fight against abortion, which we should. It's an issue of holistically valuing people made in God's image and saying you're valuable not because of what you contribute, just because of who you are. Just because you're made in the image of your Creator, you have value, you have dignity.
Well, that is an important note for us to close on today. And we're going to be back next week, continuing on in the 10 Commandments. I'm going to flip my notebook here to see what number 7 is.
Adultery.
Okay.
Do not commit adultery.
We've got another light topic next week.
None of the 10 Commandments, I don't know if you noticed this, none are light at this point.
Not
They get
light.
to the core of life. So more to come.
All right. See you next week.